again, when we hear the term boundary, we hear the term limitation. It's easy to find that as weakness. It's easy to find that as someone's holding you back, like a barrier or something. But I think even whenever we look into scripture, going back to the Genesis story of Adam and Eve, you'll find that ultimately God, he uses these two ideas of Adam and Eve resembling life and humanity. And what happens is that God is ultimately showing us that there was a temptation to pass a boundary line, because ultimately God said, you can have anything except for this specific tree of knowledge and good and evil. And then you see the tempter, Satan, come out and say, if you eat this out of this tree, ultimately you would become more like God. And so that's the first time we see a glimpse of humanity actually desiring to overcome the boundary that God even set for them for their own safety. And so we see this a lot. I think that a boundary or limitation was never meant to actually limit us, but it was actually to set us free. And why I say that is just because I think of a lot of times we want to go, instead of doing a process, we don't want to go to school for something anymore. We'd rather just watch a YouTube video. We don't want to do community anymore. We just assume that we're going to get famous. We just want to skip the steps nowadays. And I find that a lot because, especially myself, being in ministry and doing a lot of work in ministry, when I was in college, there was a guy I was in school with, and he would always talk about how he was going to begin a worldwide TV ministry. He would always talk about how he was going to preach, he was going to share the gospel. And don't get me wrong, it's this optimism, it's this hope that sometimes the church can give you, right? And so this guy had this entire methodology of how he was going to become a national TV star overnight. And it was interesting because, we would have things in school such as, Bible studies, we would have chapel, and he would always say, I'm too good for that, I don't need to go to that, I need to warm up for my national TV ministry, I'm above that. And he would always use terms like this to demonstrate that he was ultimately too good for the situation he was in today because he had dreams for tomorrow. And I think of it this way. In Luke 16, there's a story of Jesus. He's actually sharing with his followers that if you can be trusted with little, that he's ultimately going to trust you with more, right? And that's an essential teaching of Jesus that he gives us. If you're faithful with the little he's given you, then he can trust you to be faithful with a lot. And I think the issue is that most of us, we're actually insecure with the little that God has already given us, to the point that it actually creates in us a jealousy and a striving to go out and obtain the little or much that God has entrusted others with, because ultimately God has given everybody gifts. You listening right now, whether you feel it or not, you have something that's inside of you that is a gifting that was designated to you for a purpose by God. But the key isn't that you would go out and to obtain others' gifts. It's that you would operate and flourish within the gifting that God has already given you. And I think that's key because a lot of us, like I said, we feel insecure. We feel like we don't have enough. We feel like our job's not enough. We feel like our family's not enough. We feel like our resources are not enough. I think that this is a common theme within our culture. We like to compare. Whatever we don't have, we want more of. And we'll always try to obtain what others have. And that's only feeding into our insecurity. We need to stop that. We need to fit into our limitations of who we are, embrace that, and just completely operate in it. And you'll just see... you'll see something shift in your life, because what you're going to find is that you're going to stop trying to actually take control over what God has entrusted you, and you're going to begin to have faith with the little. You're going to have faith with what he's given you. You're going to have faith with what resources are around you. And ultimately, over time, that will eventually become much. And now that's not similar to the prosperity message of what many preachers preach now. But what it is saying is that if you can be resourceful with what you have, if you can be resourceful with the relationships, if you can be resourceful with the friendships, with your job, with your career, then God will use you and multiply you in those situations. And that is the teaching of Jesus. And so Similar, like the guy in my class, he was so committed to wanting to go worldwide. He wanted to have this national TV ministry. His whole goal and mindset was fixated on this idea. And I just remember telling him, I'm like, man, you can't even go worldwide if you can't first commit to being local. And I think that that's so true within so many of us, is that we have so much desire to be these great entrepreneurs. We have these great, aspirations to go out into the world, move to a new city, move to just a new country, and begin so much. But the problem is that we always buy into the lie that the grass is greener on the other side. But when in reality, the grass is only going to go greener where you decide to water it. And so it doesn't matter, where you live geographically. If you thrive as an entrepreneur, you're going to thrive anywhere you are. If you thrive as a fitness enthusiast, you're going to thrive where you are. It doesn't matter. You don't have to go to some $200 a month gym. You can thrive wherever you are. But the key is to embracing that limitation and not allowing that limitation to actually hinder you in your growth and in your potential. And also, what I want to say is that what you'll find is that you'll get to know the opportunities within your limitations. You'll get to know the relationships within your limitations, and just try and see, try and figure out ultimately what happens with your life whenever you stop chasing a potential that's on the other side and just begin to water what's in front of you. Water the relationships that are within your reach. Stop trying to reach out and grasp things that are outside of your reach, and just take hold of what God has already placed in your hands.